All right, let's jump right into it. Today, we are unpacking a really terrifying paradox about the modern world. We live in an era where humanity's absolute most destructive weapons are controlled by systems that, well, can and do fail. We're talking about the very real, chilling possibility of an accidental nuclear launch, and then we'll dive into the immediate, real-world survival strategies you're absolutely going to need if the grid suddenly goes dark. Throughout this explainer, we're going to break down just how fragile our global security actually is and lay out a realistic timeline for surviving the first 90 days of a total societal collapse.
To really grasp this, we need to start with a number that should honestly have all of our attention right now, 2,000. As we speak, across the 9 countries that hold nuclear weapons, over 2,000 of them are sitting on hair trigger alert. That literally means they are fully prepped and ready to launch at a moment's notice. Every single one of these weapons can deal catastrophic damage. Now, with global tensions being what they are, the threat is obviously looming over us, but the actual spark that sets it off, it's probably not what you think.
Let's move into Section 1, the accidental threat.
Think about what it actually takes for an intentional launch to happen. For a world leader to deliberately launch a nuke, they would have to be in a completely desperate corner. They're facing massive geopolitical hurdles, right? Immediate global retaliation, total international isolation, and just the sheer indiscriminate loss of human life. But then, compare that to an accidental launch. What does that require? Almost nothing. Just one misjudgment, one tiny miscalculation, a completely random, unexpected computer glitch. That is literally all it takes to trigger a launch and send cities up in flames for absolutely no justifiable reason.
Which brings us to Section 2, history's terrifying close calls.
So consider this super revealing quote from a French defense minister. Back in February of 2009, you had 2 massive nuclear submarines, the French Le Triomphant and the British HMS Vanguard, out on routine patrols in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, the Atlantic gives them about 40 million square miles of open water to play in. The odds of them bumping into each other are practically microscopic. But modern subs use highly specialized propulsion systems to glide around undetected. They are so remarkably silent that, as the quote says, they literally make less noise than a shrimp. Because of this perfect stealth, neither crew had a clue the other was anywhere nearby. And, in a complete freak accident, these 2 nuclear-armed vessels actually collided underwater.
And the scariest part? That 2009 incident wasn't just some isolated fluke. It has happened repeatedly. In March 1993, the American USS Grayling collided with a Russian submarine that was carrying 64 nuclear warheads. Just a year before that, in 1992, a U.S. Los Angeles-class sub hit a Russian Sierra-class sub. Think about the massive implications of a blind crash deep down in the ocean. If a sub suddenly takes massive damage and starts sinking, commanders back at base have zero idea what actually caused it. They might logically assume their vessel was just sunk by a targeted enemy attack, which instantly puts escalation and nuclear retaliation right on the table.
And look, it is not just submarines. Fast forward to a much more recent event, March 9, 2022. Pakistan's radar suddenly detects an Indian BrahMos cruise missile flying hot over the border. It travels 77 miles deep into Pakistani airspace and just crashes straight into a hotel parking lot. A nuclear-armed country had seemingly fired on its nuclear-armed neighbor with absolutely no warning. It took India 2 full days to even admit it was an accident, and it took 2 whole years to finally reveal the truth. During a routine test, a crew just forgot to disable the missile's combat connectors. Pure human error almost started a full-blown war. But human error isn't the only threat. Our computer systems fail too. Take a look at this rapid-fire history of early warning failures from the Cold War. In November 1979, someone accidentally loaded a highly realistic exercise tape into NORAD's live warning system. It showed a massive incoming Soviet attack. The US actually deployed its E-4B Doomsday plane before they caught the mistake 6 minutes later. A few months after that, radars totally misread decaying rocket bodies. And then, get this, a faulty computer chip started randomly inserting the number 2 into peacetime displays. It suddenly warned the president that 200 and then 2,000 phantom Soviet missiles were incoming.
That perfectly sets up Section 3, the modern doomsday danger.
The contrast between the Cold War and today is pretty stark. Back then, leaders had roughly 30 minutes of decision time to verify if a threat was real. Today, modern hypersonic missiles travel at speeds that shrink that window down to mere fractions of that time. On top of that, countries like China and Russia are now deploying missiles with hop-swappable warheads. This means they can literally swap out conventional and nuclear payloads right on the battlefield. So if a nation detects one of these incoming, they have only minutes to react, with absolutely no way of knowing if it's carrying a standard explosive or a city-leveling nuke. The margin for error is essentially gone.
Which naturally brings us to the ultimate question. A single spark, whether it's an errant missile or just a dumb technological glitch, could trigger a chain reaction that completely collapses our national grid and supply chains. So, if the unthinkable actually happens, and the systems we rely on every single day instantly vanish, how do you survive the first 90 days? Let's pivot to the gritty reality of community survival.
Section 4. Surviving the first 72 hours.
Those first 24 hours are what survival experts call the golden window. The general public is probably going to stay calm at first, just assuming the government is fixing things. This is your narrow window to act. Step 1. Fill every single container you own with water. Fill the bathtubs. Pumping stations are going to fail quickly, and those gravity-fed water tanks on hillsides, they'll empty out fast. Step 2. Gas up your vehicle immediately before the pumps totally die. And step 3. If you absolutely must run to the store, use cash. Credit card processing will be down instantly, and banks won't be able to process any withdrawals.
Okay, so right here is where you make the biggest decision of your life. Do you bug in or do you bug out? You have to take a hard look and ask yourself, can I actually survive for 90 days exactly where I am right now? If your plan is to bug out, you have got to do it inside that golden window. After 24 to 48 hours, the roads are going to be a nightmare, completely clogged with abandoned cars and panicked crowds. Your window for safe travel closes incredibly fast.
Moving on to Section 5, Weeks 1 through 3.
The breakdown of society is going to be rapid and severe. Within the very first week, grocery stores and pharmacies will be totally wiped out, either bought out legitimately or completely looted. People who rely on daily medicine are going to overwhelm hospitals, but those hospitals won't be able to do much without power. Without basic municipal services running, human waste and trash are going to pile up fast, which inevitably contaminates local water supplies. Expect local governments to declare martial law as they make desperate attempts to keep the peace among a totally terrified public.
Navigating through weeks 2 and 3 is all about tactical defense. If you decided to stay in your neighborhood, your absolute first priority is setting up a 24-hour watch system with your community. The most dangerous threats are always going to come at night. Next, conceal your supplies. Never, ever reveal the total amount of food or water you have stored, because if you do, it will be forcibly divided up. When you cook, only add your spices after the flame is out. You don't want the scent carrying down the street and attracting desperate people. Finally, practice smart bartering. Trade in small increments, like a single cup of beans or rice, for critical items you might need, like winter gear or tools. By the time you hit week 3, the whole psychological landscape has shifted completely. If you see a car driving down your street or hear a plane overhead, it's not a sign of rescue anymore. It doesn't mean normalcy is returning. It signifies an immediate, highly potential threat from well-resourced marauders. At this stage, you have to assume that no grand national recovery is coming, and you are entirely on your own.
And that leads us to Section 6, the 90-day survival reality. The numbers here highlight a genuinely brutal truth. Estimates actually suggest that in a prolonged nationwide grid-down scenario, fully 1/3 of the population will not survive the first 90 days. And these casualties won't just be from the initial disaster. The elderly, the medically fragile, and anyone missing essential medications will pass very quickly. After that, things like dehydration, starvation, exposure to the elements, and rampant violence will claim a lot of people who simply lack the skills or resources to live outside our fragile modern systems.
Surviving those 90 days ultimately comes down to strict mathematical preparation. 90 gallons. That is the absolute bare minimum amount of water required per person for 3 months. That covers your drinking, your basic washing, and your cooking. You simply can't survive on less than that. Practically speaking, that means knowing how to tap your 40-gallon home water heater and immediately getting rain collection systems set up before the city pipes run totally dry.
Which brings us to a really critical realization, one that completely shatters a very popular myth. The idea of the lone wolf survivalist just sitting on a massive stockpile of food in the suburbs, it's a total fantasy. True survival requires a community. You cannot be an island out there. You need manpower. You need to pool medical skills, security labor, and shared resources with a local network of people you trust. If you just try to hoard food and isolate yourself, desperate mobs are eventually going to overwhelm you. Survival means trading, delegating responsibilities, and making yourself an absolutely invaluable asset to your neighborhood.
We started this explainer by looking at how a single, totally accidental technological error could bring our wildly complex world to a grinding halt in a fraction of a second. The systems keeping us safe are fragile, and the systems keeping us fed and watered are completely dependent on the power grid. So I'll leave you with this final thought to help you really evaluate your own readiness. The clock is always ticking. When the unthinkable statistical probability actually becomes a reality and the grid goes dark, will you be a victim or a survivor? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and stay safe out there.